Hello everyone and welcome back to the Rogue Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Pickards. A short intro this week as we've got one of our most powerful stories to date coming up and we're keen to get straight into it. If you tuned into our episode last week with Jazz, you will have heard us finish with a rather bold statement. Our brief for today's show was this: if you lead a team in the workplace, at a school or in a sports club, it will be the most important 60-minute podcast you'll listen to this year. Now, some people say sport is just sport, it's not life or death. Well, sadly, owing to the pressures of life and often personal circumstances, mental health can end up deteriorating to a point where it really is a matter of life and death. It's something I've had the unfortunate displeasure of witnessing in my working life in sport, and it's something our guest today speaks about quite openly. The tool that Richard and his team have built can help find the breadcrumbs of deteriorating well-being and intervene before things spiral out of control. Once you've finished listening today, can I humbly suggest that you share it on whatever platform you use and tag any leaders, coaches or managers you think would benefit from hearing this discussion. The title for today says it all, so with that we're going to get straight into it. Episode 38, Prioritising Conversations to Ultimately Save Lives. A conversation with GoVox founder, Richard Lucas. Hello and welcome to the show, Richard. How are you doing?
Hi, all good, thanks, and thanks for inviting me along.
Oh, thanks for coming along and sharing your story. We're gonna bounce into a lot of different areas over the next half hour, 45 minutes, but it's fascinating, kind of your story and your background. So, can you just give our listeners a little bit of a insight into who you are, what you do, and kind of your journey to get to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Where to start? So, my name is Richard Lucas. I'm one of the co-founders of an organisation called GoVox. So just to get it out there early, so GoVox, some people ask us kind of what does that stand for? So Vox is apparently Latin for vocal. So as we start to talk about our story, hopefully you will see how that kind of naming strategy kind of resonates with what we do and why we do it. So yeah, I'm just your average guy really. Started getting involved with GoVox, co-founded GoVox about 3 years ago, back end of 2017, early 2018. And at that time, my approach to mental health and wellbeing was very much kind of born from my experiences and my background and how I'd kind of been brought up. And I'm really embarrassed when I start to tell this story, because actually up until that point, my involvement with wellbeing and mental health could be summed up with one phrase really, and it's kind of, everyone has a bad day, mate, get over yourself. Because I went to a grammar school, all boys grammar school. I've always worked in a male dominated environment. Rugby is my sport of passion. So my pastime has always been rugby, very male dominated. And I think over the years, going back many years, I'm an old man now, but going back many years, I think that's maybe how I was dealt with anything around feelings or wanting to kind of get support around something that was kind of to do with your mind rather than your body. So 3 years ago, we had a bit of a difficult experience in the local rugby community. As I mentioned, rugby is a big passion of mine. I played it as a youngster, played it as a younger man as well, and now I'm too old and too broken. There are some rumours of a turnout for the vets when we're out of lockdown, and that's probably more through frustration of being in lockdown and missing the guys down the club more than anything. But too old and too broken to play it these days. When I got to the point that I wasn't able to play rugby anymore, I was really sort of proud and pleased to get involved with local rugby club, Hitchin Rugby Club, which is where I live. We believe we're very special, but do you know what? There are thousands of clubs like us across different sports, whether it be to do with a ball or a pool or whatever the sport. There's thousands of clubs across the country that are very, very similar, kind of linked into the community. Great people that have a shared passion. I picked up a couple of volunteer roles at the club, started with coaching, and then over time kind of moved into take up the role of chairman in the rugby club. That sounds really grand, but just means you get moaned at a lot when the changing rooms are dirty or the toilets are blocked or the pitches are waterlogged. But it's a way for old duffers like me to give back the support that gave me so much. So yeah, 3 years ago, we had a bit of a difficult time, and we came across a couple of scenarios where we'd lost a couple of young guys to suicide. And at that time, it's the first time that I'd had any personal involvement in that kind of situation. which on reflection, I think quite lucky, but also probably maybe quite blinkered to the challenges that were out there for a lot of individuals. If I think back to 3 years ago, mental health, particularly amongst men, was being talked about a lot. It was starting to be, data was starting to be talked about it's the highest killer percentage-wise for men between a certain age. I think it's 25 and 35 or maybe higher. And it was something that I'd heard about, but not really experienced. At the same time, and it's almost, I mean, life's about timing, isn't it? At the same time, in my day job, the job that pays the bills or paid the bills, I was part of a large organisation. I'd been in a leadership role for 20 plus years. Really proud of a lot of stuff that I'd achieved across my career, kind of leading teams and developing people through to be leaders. We had a couple of what I would call near misses, and they were examples where chaps didn't turn up for work. Let's just use that as the term. And when we dug into the reasons why, there's one particular case that really resonates with me. A member of the team didn't turn up for work because he'd actually tried to take his life in the park the night before. Now, the catalyst for that was nothing to do with the work environment. It was to do with some personal challenges and stuff like that. So personally, thinking back 3 years ago, I went through a bit of an awakening, I guess, bit of a light bulb moment that as a leader in organisations, whether it be in the sport that I love or whether it be in the job that I'm doing and looking after people, I had a huge responsibility for their mental health and well-being, and I was probably failing in some areas to recognise that. So got together with some pretty pragmatic people, shared with them my challenges and my kind of thoughts and concerns, and just started to look around to see, first of all, was this in isolation? Had it just been a bunch of cases that I'd personally come across, and you know what, it wasn't too big a problem. But unfortunately, and once is too many, but unfortunately there were more and more cases when we started to talk to other leaders in other sports clubs, in schools, in other organisations, in other corporate organisations. There were more cases than even the data that we were starting to have that conversation 3 years ago around kind of would point you towards. So we started to look at it, and the first thing we did is we kind of jumped on, right, okay, where's the support for these people? It's terrible that people have got to the point that they have taken a moment of personal crisis, whether it be attempted suicide or whether it had been suicide itself. Where's the support for these people? Because obviously there's a gap here and we need to make sure that we fill it. I'm really, really pleased that even then 3 years ago, and it's rocketed so much more now, but there was great support there. There are brilliant people that are there sitting and waiting to support people that need their support in these circumstances. When we looked at ourselves in the organisation, so as kind of leaders, coaches, line managers, those kind of roles, the basic skills were also there as well, because when we started to look at individuals and we started to talk to people really honestly about their experiences, everyone has the ability to have a conversation. And when we looked into the cases that we'd come across, they had two things in common. One of them, they were predominantly male, not always, because it is still a big issue for females as well, but predominantly they were male. The one big thing that they all had in common is they almost had an ability to wear a mask when they were really struggling. So in a group environment, in the club environment, at work, in their kind of social circles, they were actually kind of almost the life and soul of the party characters in a lot of cases. So if you had a role of responsibility within that group, or you were just part of that group, if you were a teammate or a colleague at work, you almost wouldn't think that there was a concern with them because they were putting on this front and this mask. So the reason why that's important is we started to then challenge ourselves to say, right, okay, if you are a leader, a responsible person, if you are someone that's been trained in mental health first aid or taken the personal step to get some more training around supporting people, if you are a team member, if you are a manager that would just help people if you knew someone needed help, which 99.9% of us, we're all like that. If we saw a mate down or got the nudge that, you know what, someone's not feeling themselves, we'd prioritise a conversation. We'd pick up the phone and have a chat. I know it's kind of lockdown scenario at the moment. We'd jump on a Zoom call, or when we're not on lockdown, we'd hit them up for a beer, take them for a beer at the club, or go for a cup of tea and a coffee, because that's what people do, because inherently we want to care for each other. So we then started to look at, okay, so we've got a scenario where people are struggling, and they get to the point within that struggle where they actually take pretty drastic action. Like if someone gets to the point that they feel that the exit route for them is to take their own life, I mean, that's terrible. We've got a group of people, a significant group of people, that would help and want to help and have the skill set to help and have a conversation, can reach out to experts if it's needed for any further stuff. So what was missing? What was the magic kind of bit in the middle that could have sewed those two together? And we started to look at ourselves and had a huge amount of conversations with, I would say, hundreds of leaders across different sports, different parts of the world, just to kind of really understand. And what we kind of came to is that when you're a leader, or when you're put into a position of responsibility, when you're responsible for a team of people, you don't get sprinkled with a magic dust that means you have the ability to read people's minds. You're still a person in your own right. You've still got life challenges. You've still got your own mental health and well-being. You've got families. You've got challenges. You've got things you want to celebrate. You've got things that you're focusing on. You've got things you've got challenges. You're still exactly the same. I don't know if I can use the language on your podcast, so you might have to mute it out, but I use the phrase that you still shit when you sit down. It's kind of, you're exactly the same as everybody else. Just because you're a leader, it's not magic. So with that in mind, how could we create something? And at the time we didn't know what it was, but how could we create something that could support those roles to make sure that they knew who in their team would most benefit from a cup of tea and a chat? And that, if you take that as the kind of the starting point, if you're looking after a team of people in whatever scenario, the coach of the swimming clubs, the coach at the rugby club, the wellbeing officer within the football club, the manager at work, if you can only make one telephone call today and you've got a team of, say, 20, 25 people, 30, 50 people in your squad, which one person are you going to prioritise and pick up the phone to? Now, that's quite a poignant thing to reflect on, because how do you know who is the person that would get the most benefit if you were going to prioritise their well-being and their mental health? The old Richard, and probably still the current Richard, to be fair, I mean, this is a journey for me personally, but the old Richard of 3 years ago, I would probably have prioritised that conversation based on some kind of performance metric. Whether it be at work, it may well have been how many widgets someone had installed or sold, or whatever performance metric was important at that time within the business. In the rugby environment, it might have been prioritise the phone call to the captain of the team that hadn't got the best results, or the player that was struggling, and those sorts of things. So that might not have been the best call to make, because I might have added to a problem, because actually I would have approached that conversation with my agenda. It would have been about how their performance is impacting me and what can we do to improve it. I wouldn't have necessarily approached that performance from their perspective. How are you? How's things? How's the family? How you feeling? Those sorts of stuff. So that's kind of the journey, and a very long version of I did warn you that I waffle on a bit, but that's kind of the journey that we got to as to why we saw the need for something like GoVox. And the last 3 years have been quite incredible and quite a pace of change, both in what we are doing, but also in what we see in and around in society, and people talking more about it. So GoVox was created to fill that gap. It's created off the back of, we are hugely connected in society at the moment, and that continues. You only have to look at these things, and people are incredibly connected to them. Whether you agree with that as a principle or not, it's reality. You only have to look at your Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever platform is your choice, or people use many these days to connect with people. People are really honest to these things. People will say things on their Facebook account, on their Twitter, that they wouldn't say to you if they were sitting down opposite you. They will open up to you in a way that they've created that real comfort bubble in there. So that's where we kind of came together with, okay, can we create a social technology platform that can connect leaders to their people more effectively and help them prioritize the conversation that matters? Now, that tagline is something that came later from one of our first clients, but really it's something to keep in mind. So GoVox, we challenge ourselves to make sure that everything we do, how can we make it more simple? How can we make it more simple? It's about connecting people. So really, if you've got a responsibility for a group of people, for whatever reason it is, how would you know which person on a Monday morning would most benefit from that cup of tea and a chat, or on lockdown, that kind of Zoom, that reach out, that text, that WhatsApp? You really don't know. And how do you prioritize that conversation? If you've got the luxury of time to make all of the conversations and speak to everybody, brilliant. You probably, on reflection, you haven't got that amount of time to do it. So that's why we exist, and that's why we do what we do.
Brilliant. And that's it. It wasn't waffle at all. It was very much a thorough oversight. And I think the thing that I find most fascinating when I talk to companies that are young and fresh and trying to meet a current need, instead of perhaps more established companies that are perhaps trying to adapt. I think one of the things that really jumps out for me there is this personal drive, but not in a selfish way, if that makes sense. And that aligns so much to a lot of not just sports people that I speak to, but coaches, managers and other sports, but their personal passion, their drive. And it stems from usually a story or a moment or an experience. And actually looking at it from the other side, as you've talked about, putting yourself in their shoes, that might feel like we'd say, why are we prioritizing a cup of tea? But actually looking at it with the person who's struggling, whether that's a young athlete, whether that's an employee, whether it's a friend, could change their life. And I think that until you've experienced that, and we spoke off air, I've had some very uncomfortable experience of it recently. It changes things. It changes things when you see both the value of it when you have that wonderful conversation with people, but also when you get a near miss or sadly a tragic situation occur. So I think it is so powerful to bring that to life through a story. And what I'd be keen to do is actually unpick a little bit of now because I'm sure there's a lot of people sitting there thinking, well, that's me. I'm in that role. Whether I'm a coach, a manager, or whatever it is, what does that look like in terms of a procedure without sounding too formal, and then like actions? What does that look like with what you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, it's a technology solution. It's a social platform that enables leaders to prioritize that conversation, or responsible people within a group to prioritize that conversation. So the process itself, and as I mentioned, we really drive. I've got a fantastic team that drive me to challenge it all the time to make sure we make it as simple as possible. Because if we think about where we are in society, I've already mentioned that we're incredibly well connected digitally. That comes with its challenges. We have an attention span of nanoseconds. Anyone that's made it this far through the podcast, fair play to you, because most people these days are scrolling through and moving through, but it's only down to the great content that Kevin pulls together that it's worthwhile sticking on. So we kind of push that. So the process at the moment, and we have got some fantastic innovations on the way that take it even a step further. But when we sign up a new organisation, the first thing we do is we go in quite humble, because we've got a platform that works, and we've got a process that works, and we've got some insights that have been incredibly powerful. As I mentioned, the last 3 years have been a whirlwind. We're live in 7 different countries. We now support athletes from Olympic level still down to grassroots sports. We're in schools, we're in corporate organisations of some considerable size, and I still think back to our first ever customer who we love dearly was an undertaker's with 3 or 4 local shops, and just wanted to connect with their people, a passion about their well-being, and kind of picking it up. So keeping that simplicity, it all works exactly the same. When we sign up a new organisation, we get to know them a little bit more, and actually we say to them, look, we're going to learn together. We've got something that works, but let's polish the edges of it so it works brilliantly for you. We load their users in, and our system is all built around trying to find out who in the organisation needs the support. So once a month, and when we started this, we got really excited and we thought this was a weekly process. But once a month, users receive an invite to check in. They receive it through their email account. Takes them about 30 seconds once they've clicked through to check in. There's no login required. So again, that short attention span, that reason for people to be distracted and go and do something else, we kind of keep it tight with there. So we get something like a 60 to 70% engagement rate with the tool, which is pretty high. Takes them about 30 seconds, a minute to check in. They answer a set of non-intrusive wellbeing questions. And the reason why I kind of term them as that is that we're not here to interrogate people or make them feel uncomfortable. We're also not here to put a seed of doubt in people's minds and start thinking them down a kind of negative pathway. So working with experts, and we've had some great collaborators along the way, and we've got some brilliant partnerships that continue to flourish. Mind in Mid-Hearts are huge advocates of ours, and we're huge advocates of theirs, and we work very closely together. We actually took our platform to them for some kind of validation, really, just to check, because they're the experts. And that conversation resulted in them adopting the platform for their staff, because they have some pretty difficult conversations and then are expected to go home and make the tea in the evening. So we actually support them as well, which was, from a pride point of view, was kind of massive for us. So yeah, the questions are designed not to interrogate people. So just give you a couple of examples. So we know that loneliness is a big driver of mental health and wellbeing challenges. So we don't ask people, do you feel lonely? Because that's a bit naff and it's a little bit intrusive. But we will ask questions like, with the younger users, do you feel you've got a good bunch of mates? Or in the corporate environment, do you feel you spent a good amount of time with your colleagues this week? In the sports teams, do you have interests outside of whatever the sport is, rugby, swimming, whatever? So we kind of look to make sure that we've got the key areas that we know we want to get the insights from, but we want to ask the questions in a soft way. So things like, rather than ask people, are you feeling anxious? There'll be a question in there that talks about, I don't know, things really bother me. And the responder it's a multiple choice response. It's dead easy to do, 10 or 12 questions. And then the last question always gives the user the ability just to leave a personalised comment. Now, one of the things that's really, really key with GoVox is that it isn't anonymous. So when you check in, the person receiving the responses to that within your organisation, the nominated support within there, they will know exactly who said what and who has been identified in which way. Because our premise is that it's kind of great to know that, I don't know, 20, 30% of your team are unhappy or 70% are happy, but it's really, really useful to know which 20%, because before we were involved with organisations, what we found is they were kind of doing some great stuff, but vanilla applying it to everybody because they didn't know who really needed it. So whether it was people are struggling with their work-life balance, or they're struggling to sleep, or any of those sorts of things. And if you think about the pandemic of the last year, those needs have really been accentuated in a lot of cases. Rather than apply vanilla support to everybody, the system like GoVox enables them to identify exactly who. So if you and I checked in, Kevin, and we were part of an organisation together, our comments would be captured. We know what Richard said, we know what Kevin said, and we know which areas we're struggling in. So from a user's perspective, they check in, dead easy, dead quick, it's done. What we then do, we've then obviously got a load of data. And what I would say is that great timing for us to look at a wellbeing tool in the last 2 or 3 years. Terrible timing when it comes to data because GDPR, etc. But from a security point of view, brilliant timing. And our system, we've recently been working with the NHSX, which is a part of the NHS, which is designed to get new technology into the NHS quickly. If you think about some of the security stuff around health data, etc., the GDPR and the data security stuff is really important, something that we have all the certification for, etc. So we've got a lot of data now from a check-in. Rather than just send that to the responsible person, the leader in the organisation, or the person nominated to receive the results, if we go back to the story as to why we exist and why we started, is those people have got a lot on their plates. They've got a lot to do. They've got their own lives. So if we just sent them a load of data on a spreadsheet, they'd kind of fall over a little bit. And actually, human nature says you would pick and choose what you want to kind of know from it and dismiss what you didn't really want to know. And because that's just human nature, and you see it through your own lens. So what we do is we have something else that delivers those results, the online wellbeing dashboard. So it takes that data and it presents it in actionable insights. So it's something I know you and I have spoken about, Kevin. Actionable insights are golden. Whether it be to do with your mental health or your physical health or anything you're trying to do around your performance, if you know what the problem is and you can pinpoint it quickly, you can put a strategy in place to support it. So if we go back to your swimming example, you can see that across performance for the athletes or the swimmers and all of those sorts of things. And we see that and it's a great way within sports to kind of tie the two conversations together. So the dashboard is dead simple. It's updated in real time, so the results are instant. Again, that's a big plus for the GoVox system. On that system, we highlight a couple of things. So we highlight, first of all, how many people have checked in. So you can see who in your team has checked in and who hasn't. We highlight what we call red flags. So these are individual specific answers to questions that might just be a catalyst for a conversation. So if someone has responded negatively to a question, so one of the questions we ask, for example, would be around online bullying. But we don't ask people, are you being bullied on Facebook? We ask a very nice question that says, are you comfortable with how people interact with you on social media? Because the level of comfort is the person's choice of how they're comfortable with it. If someone was to respond negative to that and strongly disagree with that statement, that would come up as a red flag. That's visible on the dashboard. You can click on it. You can see exactly who's red flagged. So if I was in the user that had red flagged and you were looking at the dashboard, Kevin, you would know it's me. You could choose off of that alone to prioritize a conversation. Now, that could be something, it could be nothing, it could be everything, but at least you're having the conversation. Particularly powerful with younger people, because it could just be that they got a snotty message off of one of their mates on Instagram and they didn't like it, or it could be something a lot deeper than that, but at least you're having the conversation before it becomes something bigger. So the red flags are powerful, really powerful, and they're very visible on the dashboard. We then capture the comments left on the last question. So you will see on there anything that people have written in on the last question. You get some great stuff on there. You get stuff that's linked to wellbeing. You get stuff that's linked to your organisation. You get stuff that's humorous. You get stuff that's really powerful. Young users are incredibly open on it, and just ties you back to that bit I was talking about people's openness to their little phone screens. And then we have final bit of the dashboard is something that we created at the very start that we thought we'd have to change because we thought it was a bit cringy. But it's called the happiness score. And there is a graph on the dashboard that shows all of the users within that team, and there's a bar chart that shows how happy they are. Now that is calculated from the algorithm behind all of the questions, and it just gives you a one-shot glance. So it takes you, I know I've spoken about it for 10 minutes because, as I said, I do like to waffle, but as a responsible person, as the swimming coach that's been nominated, or the rugby coach, or the manager at work, or the mental health first aider has been nominated to receive this information, you can see it in about 20-30 seconds across your team. Right, this is the person that's struggling the most. So going back to my challenge to everybody, if you could only make one phone call today, or if you could only invite one person for a cup of tea and a chat, who will it be? You can click on them and see the exact answers they've given, so you get some context behind their relative unhappiness to the rest of the team, and you can start that conversation. So I always say that GoVox doesn't replace anything you do now or anything you would do in the future. There are some fantastic tools and support for people to use. What we do is we help you identify who needs it, so that you're not just investing your time and your energy and your resources in vanilla approach for everybody without knowing who needs it, what the impact is, because the dashboard is live. You can go back on previous dashboards. You can look at data of trends around happiness and all those sorts of things. So I know I said it was cringy and we were going to change it, but actually we've now changed that to an ambition that happiness becomes the new currency within organisations. So I would love a future where you choose which school to send your child to based on the happiness score, because it misses out the middleman. It's the person that's in the organisation in a very controlled way telling you what they think about their lives and how happy they are. You would perhaps choose which organisation to go and work for based on their happiness score, because it's independent, because it's honest, and it kind of pulls it through. So yeah, that's how it works, and that's the system. There are a myriad of innovations on the way. I push the team quite hard for the new innovations, innovate or die, but really with the premise as to why we do this. And you mentioned yourself there about having a real strong reason as to why you do something. We've had a couple of Christmases as an organisation now, and it's the one point in the year that I remind the team as to why we've been successful in what we do. And it's not a success built on number of users or financial performance. It's that there are people enjoying Christmas that wouldn't enjoy Christmas if we didn't do what we do, because we're very embedded in our why, and it's to save lives, which we were really uncomfortable with coming to that statement when we first landed on it as being our why, but I'll probably get the chance to tell you that story another time.
I think there's a couple of things I want to pick up there. The first thing as an observation is, I think too often people tiptoe around this area because it's relatively speaking, in the world of development, management, support, whatever field you're working in, it's a relatively emerging field in the sense that, like you said a few years ago, it still is a massive issue of the stiff upper lip, and discussed it on the last season of the podcast, particularly with men, this ability of just, I'm fine, just get on with it kind of thing. So I think that language is changing, but it's still not the norm yet. The second thing, and I think I don't in any way want everyone listening to think this is all doom and gloom. To have your staff, school children, athletes increase their happiness because you've had a conversation with them, the likelihood is they're going to perform better at work, they're going to perform better at school. And if you're in a sports team, and I know you've mentioned like some of the higher level athletes that you get to work with, funnily enough, if an athlete standing behind a block at an Olympic Games has had a 10% increase in their happiness because of the conversations that their coach or their psychologist or the nutritionist or whoever it is has been able to have with them, funnily enough, they'll perform better. So I think there might be people out there who go, not that this isn't for me, but they kind of go, well, we don't have worst case scenario. I've never had to deal with it. It's like, well, you deal with human beings every day of your life. And especially, I mean, we've talked to a few Olympic level athletes, and we've got a couple more coming up in this season. And one of the things they talk about is the experience and how some of the more memorable aspects of their journey, whether it's their coach, whether it's someone all the way back at school who's left a memorable experience on them, which has actually meant it stay with them for the rest of their life. And that point you just made there about the fact there's people sitting there at the Christmas just gone who have been using this, who perhaps wouldn't be sitting there if that conversation hadn't been had. When you talk about why, I don't think you can get any more, concrete in why you do something to go, we save lives. A bottom line, that is it. Hey, there's tons of other stuff you guys do, but actually in terms of power, and that's why I really wanted to share this story with people, because I don't think anyone generally can resonate with anything more emotionally than life or death. That is, that's the black and white of it all. So it's I really am. I've taken a lot from those insights so far. So I'm curious, you talk about obviously where it's going to go next, and obviously your why so far. The happiness thing you've talked about in the workplace, I guess a lot of that is going to come down to a culture where actually mental health is as part of your performance indicators, your KPIs that you've talked about from a corporate, sport, school perspective. So like you say, not we get 25% of our kids into university, or we get 99% of our kids for A star to C at GCSE. Hey, none of our kids drop below 90% in their happiness score across the 5 years with us. None of our staff leave because their happiness drops too low. And actually, that's what a powerful dream that is.
There's a really powerful question that we ask. You mentioned about staff leaving. So there is a really powerful question we ask in a lot of our check-ins. And you might, at the face value of it, you might think, what's that got to do with mental health and well-being? But obviously our catalyst of the story was all around the kind of the personal crisis stuff, and us and me, I'm not equipped to support people at that area. That's where experts are required. What we've tried to do is pull it all the way down to happiness. So actually, if you know something about somebody 6, 9, 12 months before the big event, then it is often, and cost shouldn't come into it, but it's often would be cheaper, more effective, and easier to support them. So the question that is in a lot of our corporate check-ins asks users, if you receive the same income to do the same job, how likely is it you would leave to work for a competitor? Now, that is a really powerful question for a couple of reasons. Our process isn't anonymous, so people know that their line manager or someone within their business, someone in their organization sees that response. 21% of people say they are likely or very likely to leave. Now, that for me is a great indicator that people are honest. They know that their line manager or someone in their business is going to see that response, but they're still confident to respond because it's what they feel. Now, if you think about it, we've taken money out of the equation, we've taken the job they do out of the equation. So what else is it in their environment that they don't like? Now, the key to that really is, if you know about that 6, 9, 12 months before, most organisations have an exit interview at the end when someone's got that other job and they're leaving to work for a competitor or changing career. I'd love to be part of the catalyst of keeping people in key roles like teaching, like medicine and NHS, etc. because it's about the environment they're working in. So if you're within that group and you've got, and again, it's about knowing the 21% of people, who they are, so you can actually go and have an impactful conversation with them, because actually it will be around their well-being, it will be around the environment that they work in, it will be around the conditions that they work in. We reflect that in sport as well. As I mentioned, my passion, rugby, being involved with the local rugby club, one of the big challenges for any local grassroots sports is keeping people engaged, keeping athletes, young athletes, part of the sport. There's a couple of key stages that all young people go through that becomes a distraction from the sport that they're doing. So not everybody. I was never going to play professional rugby. Some people would argue that I should probably never have played rugby itself, but I was at that level where it was third team rugby for me. That was only as good as I was ever going to be, but that was a sport that I chose to do, and I stuck with it. A lot of people are in that, whether it be swimming, cricket, football, whatever the sport of choice is. Now, if you've got that local swimming club, there's a couple of things why it's really important to keep those young athletes involved. Some of them will go on to be brilliant athletes. Many of them will get life skills out of being involved in that discipline and being involved with people that are mentors from a coaching perspective that are nothing to do with swimming, but will push them on in their lives, in their education, just in their lives. It's just rounding those people, and all of the sports have the ability to do that. So there's all of that stuff. There's also the club bit as well. That's probably a paying member that keeps the coffers coming into the club, which means that whatever facilities can be put on, the coaches can be paid, and however the club is structured, all that sort of stuff. So you don't want people leaving the sport for personal reasons, for the ambition of it, but also for the club's reasons as well. So that question that we talked about there from a corporate point of view is, how likely would you go and work for a competitor? We use questions in there like, very, very simple. I am enjoying my swimming. Now, when someone responds negatively to that and they're in your local swimming club, at least you can pick up the phone to them and say, I understand you're not enjoying your swimming. Can you have a chat with me about that? What is it that we could do better? What is it that we could do differently? Because it will be something small to start with. Now, the end result of that, being blind to that in weeks' times, in months' times, in a couple of years' time, is they'll just stop turning up. And it's very difficult then to get them back because they've been disconnected to it. As I mentioned, we find that young athletes, young people have a few distractions that kind of happen at certain times of their personal development. The distraction of loads of stuff, gaming, online gaming, relationships, exams, prioritizing other things over the sport that maybe they started when they were 10, 12 years old. And then actually when they get to 15, 16 years old, they've kind of gone off into a different direction. But having that conversation and knowing who they are 6, 12, 18 months earlier, making that small change. It might just be that they don't like the length of the session, or they didn't like one particular session, or they don't like one particular element of it. But you know what? At least you know, and you can talk to them about it, and you can put changes in. And we do see an increase in retention at the grassroots level in the sport. For me, that's really important for people like me. I've got so much out of being part of the rugby community as your classic third team rugby player. As I say, never going to be a professional athlete, but the connections I've made, the friendships I've made, the feelings I get from kind of giving back to the group that have been so much to me, way outpower for me personally moving on to be a professional athlete. So yeah, there's real power in it, and there's real power in, focusing on someone's well-being isn't just about the individual, it's about the organisation as well. Because every organisation, the happier it is there, the better it is. The people delivering it, the people running it. I mentioned earlier about being chairman of the rugby club and you just get moaned at more. Well, it's not great to be moaned at. So if I knew that people weren't happy about X, Y, and Z earlier in the journey before it became a moan, I'm proactive. I'd look at it and see what we could do differently. And actually, you know what? Maybe the moaning would drop down and it would be a happy place. Now, I'm not saying it'd be like Disney and everyone's sort of dancing around, but that's a rugby club for you. But
there's another couple of things there that jump out at me. The first one is around this caring aspect, and I think I'm very fortunate. I've had some wonderful sporting experiences, and COVID aside, I meet up with a coach that I worked with probably when I was 10. Still now, we'll go for a beer, we'll go for a curry, friends with the family, because of the fact I knew from a young age they cared.
Yeah.
And there's a photo of me knocking around somewhere with an athlete that I raced against when I was 9. We're in our mid-30s now, and he coaches at a school in the same sport as me. And we've both been on this swimming journey, and I think I can name from that kind of era those people that are still involved. But I'm sure there's a lot out there that through these types of conversations, they wouldn't have gone on and necessarily stayed in the sport as a coach or a developer or whatever it is they do, but they would have had a better experience, which would have had a longer term impact on their life. And I think the opportunity for a coach, teacher, welfare officer, manager, whoever it is, to have that impact. And I say it doesn't have to be doom and gloom stuff. We can just talk about, damn, that person actually gives a damn about. So at the end of the year, 1 or 2 of those conversations a year have actually mean I've had a hugely positive experience this year from my sport. And when I have had a bit of a downer, actually someone's come along and said, are you okay? And spoke about it. And we've done something to address that, instead of the tiny little breadcrumbs becoming something, like you say, the crisis at the end. And it could tragically be suicide. It could just be somebody sitting there miserable with their sport or their life or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're putting people's lives in a better place because of a conversation. And like you say, most people are already having some form of approach to it. They're, having a group approach. We're having a group meeting. How's everyone doing? And like you say, most people put a front up, whereas actually to take that away and interact on their phones and go, look, you guys are doing this already. How are you getting on? Actually, probably a bit more comfortable doing that than standing up in a group of 50 people on a poolside, on a pitch in a corporate boardroom and saying, you know what? Something's not quite right, but actually I'm just going to sit on it. And then suddenly, and people go, I had no idea. And I'm sure you've heard that in your journey so far, where people go, I had no idea that was an issue.
We have. I mean, we're just getting close to 500,000 check-ins, so we don't see anywhere near the insight personally that we used to see in the early days, but we know specific examples. And do you know what? Quite regularly get phone calls from users, from organisations. To the one that really resonates with me, we went live with a client after about 6 or 7 months, got a phone call out of the blue from a chap I didn't know, just to say thank you for getting this tool into our organisation. And that's where the tagline, that conversation was the catalyst for the tagline, prioritise the conversations that matter. Because from a company point of view, we were struggling to kind of take the half an hour conversation that I can have with yourself and explain why we do what we do and just put it down into that kind of one phrase. And I got this phone call out of the blue, and it was an organisation, not sport related, but the premise of the system is exactly the same. They had a diverse workforce who were out in people's homes on a regular basis doing a technical job. And this particular line manager probably had about 25 people working underneath him, but they all lived kind of within a couple of hours drive away. So he couldn't go and see everybody all the time. He's got his own job to do as well, and he's got his own family and all of these sorts of things that I spoke about earlier. So they've been using the tool for a while, and he actually used to just kind of track the happiness of the team. And he mentioned to me, and a lot of this really boosted what we do. And I don't think this guy probably ever will realise. I probably need to ring him back and give him a thank you, that the difference it made to what we do. But he said, look, I spotted that one of my team wasn't looking himself from the responses that were coming through. So, and this is where he first used the line. He said, so I prioritised that conversation that mattered this week, and I picked up the phone to him and I thought, right, hang on a minute, just write that down, because that's the phrase I've been looking for. So he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, so I rang the guy up and I said, look, where it was on a Monday, where are you on Wednesday? I want to come and have a coffee with you. The guy's first response apparently was, what have I done wrong? Because he's used to being out there doing his job, cracking on, and maybe the line manager feels your collar when there's a problem. But the manager was like, no, nothing wrong. I just fancy coming to see you. So they met at some generic coffee shop, had a coffee on the Wednesday. And the manager was relaying to me, he said, look, I'll explain to you what happened. He said, and I'll be very honest about it. He said, we started having a conversation and I explained to the guy, look, it doesn't look like you're good self at the moment. Is there anything going on? And he applied all of the skill sets that he had as a good leader, open questions, talking to the individual about himself rather than just applying his own agenda on the conversation. And the guy opened up, and the catalyst for this is terrible, and we hope we never come across it, but sadly it's the world we live in. The individual's sister had recently been attacked, and the guy was just struggling to deal with it. real emotions, which I think we can probably all associate with. The manager said, well, first off, he wouldn't have known that unless he'd instigated that conversation, because that very male, I'm all right, mate, get over yourself, kind of, I've got stuff going on outside, but why would my line manager even be interested in that sort of stuff? I'll just deal with it. But because the manager had prioritised that conversation, gone and had the open questions, the guy felt comfortable to open up. So the manager was then, the individual that rang me was, again, really honest and said, look, I'll tell you what would have happened. He said, the guy was really struggling. He said he probably would have gone off sick. He said, but don't worry, and I mean this a bit glibly, but don't worry, we've got a process for that. And if he's off sick for too long, we'll get rid of him. And I'm kind of, they probably wouldn't have done, but that's kind of where he was edging towards. They've got a process for it if someone's off sick. He said the guy does a technical job, and there is every chance that he might not have been concentrating on what he was doing. And if he'd left a safety defect, that could have put him at harm, but also their customer as well. But the guy said, but don't worry, we've got a process for that, and it probably would have involved him leaving the business. Or he could have just, you know what, he wears the company uniform, he could have been out and about, someone might have said something, he might have snapped, he might have been rude to a customer, because when your head's in a different space, the guy was struggling. He said, don't worry, if we get a complaint like that, we've got a process for that. It probably involves him leaving the business. He said, but because we were able to catch him, because we had the conversation, that individual now will never work anywhere else. He thinks this is the best place to work ever because we've been able to get support in for him and his sister and his family. We can't change what happened, but we've got support in for them. He said, me as a leader of people, as a line manager, I've had my best week's work ever. I've made a real difference to one of my team. I could have rocked up and picked up the phone to that guy later in the week about his performance because he hadn't done so many jobs that he should have done. But without knowing the context behind it, I would have layered on my problem to him and probably made the situation worse. And that's really where the prioritise the conversation that matter line came from that very conversation. And for me, it's a story that we've heard many times in different ways, and we know it makes a difference. And you know what? 99% of people will be fine. But it's because of tools like GoVox, you can identify who the 1% are at that point in time. You can put the intervention in, you can prioritise the cup of tea in the chat. And you know what? If it's something, you can support it. If it's nothing, great. You've just had a conversation. That's never a waste. If it's everything, hey, at least you've caught it, eh? And you can have the conversation, you can make the real difference. So that's why we're so passionate about what we do, because of that sort of feedback. I mean, during COVID, we've created over 3.5 million touch points with users. So as I mentioned, we're live in 7 countries. It's translated into a number of different languages. And it's been a whirlwind 3 years, and we're just looking for it to grow, and to make sure we can support more and more organisations having those conversations.
Well, I think going forwards, and our conversation started because, let's say, quite a negative situation I experienced, but I could not believe how quickly and clearly I understood your why. And I think we interacted on Twitter about it, but I put out the story of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And the example from Simon Sinek, gave an example of, say, an Apple or someone like that. But in this such passionate and emotional area, I think everyone listening out there can relate immediately to what you're saying and go, yeah, no, I can see myself through the end user. I can see myself through the manager or the leader. And for anyone involved in sport, we want people to have a good experience. That's why you do sport, whatever level. Doesn't matter whether you're at the high performance or grassroots. So we're more than happy as a podcast to scream about what you're doing and share it as far and wide as possible, because regardless of the intricacies of the how and the features and all that sort of stuff, the why of what you're doing is absolutely clear, and it's very, very powerful. So I don't know, like, having been on, you said, like, what, 3.5 year now journey, what would you go back and say to yourself 2016? Would you give yourself, yeah, I know, big question there, but I'm just thinking of it. You're so reflective on and understand why you do what you do and the journey you've been on so far. If you could go back and give yourself a message, even, hey, when you were starting your business journey, perhaps like a lot of our listeners out there are still very early on in their careers, what would you say and leave a message?
So I think there's a couple of things there. So myself personally, I I joined an organisation. I was lucky to join a brilliant organisation at 17 years old. I had floppy hair back then, so you can see they took something from me. But think Hugh Grant, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and you won't be far off. So I joined at 17, and I had a lot of arrogance, not much skill, a good bit of chatter. And that organisation developed me through over the years. I did 28 years in the same organisation. I'm really proud of them and what the people in that organisation did for me. It turned me into who I am today. I'm not the finished article. I've got huge flaws in what I do. I'm a massive obsessive, and that drives me crazy and drives everyone crazy around me. But what it did do, it kind of turned me from boy into man, I guess. If I think back across my career, there are 3 or 4 individuals, and they know who they are because I've reached out to them recently. So if it's not you, by the way, and I haven't reached out to you, then you didn't make that impact. But there's 3 or 4 individuals that really changed how I see things. If I went back to 2016, I think I would try and force myself to be more reflective of not always driving a conversation around my own agenda, and actually listening more. I mean, it's the classic, isn't it? You've got two ears and one mouth. And for someone that talks a lot, that's a challenge, by the way. But to listen more and to kind of understand what's going on, because I got to the point where I was quite pleased and proud of my career. It was a career, nothing to do with well-being. It was it was in a people business, managing teams. I had a good sales career in there, and up until 2016, 2017, I would have defined my success as top of this chart, top of that chart. Most businesses are the same. There'll be metrics that you're measured on, whether it be customer satisfaction, whether it be sales conversion rate, whether it be productivity, whatever that measure is, there's a measure in there. And I probably nailed my personal success on that. But I've got a new mantra now, and it's kind of, if I ever lost anyone on my watch, I would be devastated. So when all's said and done and I retire, or for whatever reason I'm not around, what are people going to say about me? They're not going to say, oh, that's the guy that was top of the sales charts in 2015 and did the most widgets in the business. Hopefully they're going to turn around and say, well, that's the guy that actually cared about us and made a difference and gave me the foot up, because those 3 or 4 people that I reflect back in my career made those significant differences. Because one of them once made a comment to me when I applied for a promotion, and I was amazed that I got it. I got the promotion, and he summed it up in that when I admitted to him that I was surprised that I'd been the candidate that they went for. He said, "We've decided we want to invest in Richard Lucas," and that was powerful. That statement alone was really, really powerful. So, yeah, I think we've all got personal journeys, and we've got people that have influenced over our time. You mentioned there about someone that you keep in touch with who was your coach when you were 10. I've got those kind of characters that I look up to massively, and they probably don't realise. And I've got those situations in my own career and life where I think, you know what, I could have done better there. I probably let someone down. And if I'd known then what I know now, and I'd learned to listen more rather than project my own agenda onto the conversation, I could have made a bit of a difference. So that's probably what I would do there. And I think for anyone out there starting a new organisation, starting a new company, whatever it is, thick skin, get good people around you. You mentioned there about the why. So that's something that we obviously had it at the start, but I never actually sat down and thought about it and wrote it down. And we had a young guy, Ollie, joined the team last year. He's absolutely brilliant. And I remember sitting just in this office actually, and he'd watched the Simon Sinek video, and he started talking to me. So as I mentioned, I'm not the finished article, and I've got this real terrible obsessive thing that if I'm doing something, it's pointless to talk to me about something else. And everyone laughs at the fact that if I'm on my laptop writing an email, they can come and stand next to me and talk to me, and it's like there might as well be a wall there. I just don't have that ability to do 2 things at once. But he started chatting to me about this thing, and it started off as a distraction, and he knows this because I've had this conversation with him. It started as a distraction. Then I started to half listen to what he was saying, And then I kind of sat back in the chair and kind of said, right, okay, it's obviously important to him. I'm going to listen to what he's saying, trying to learn from my own failings. So he was telling me about this Simon Sinek video about knowing your why. So he said to me, what's our why? What is our why? And I've got to be honest, I first thought, this is a load of millennial nonsense. I'm not really interested. I know, like, I can tell you what our why is. I've chatted to you at the interview for 2 hours about what our why was. Like, you hear me talk to clients about what our why is, and I bore them for an hour about why we do what we do. He said, no, we need to get this right. So we've got a whiteboard in the office. So I said, right, we're going to get our why. So we've got everyone round. Right, Ollie wants us to know what our why is. It's really important that we know what our why is. He's listened to this great video of this guy that's a genius and has told this story. If we know what our why is, we are going to just catapult what we do. So first question, what's our why? To save lives, right? Wrote it on the board. And then we all looked at it, and we, without saying it to each other, we thought, well, that's a bit grandiose. So that's a bit over the top. How are we going to be saving people's lives? We already know we haven't got the skills to support people when they're in that dark time. We've got great partners that do that. We're not the people that are having the conversation. So let's move on. And we probably spent about 2 or 3 days with this thing on the wall. We wrote all different sorts of things around it. And we came back to it in the end. And the first comment was the one that we landed on. And it has rocketed what we've done. I've got to be honest, it has rocketed what we've done. It makes the conversation more genuine. It makes it resonate more. And it keeps more purpose in what we do. So we've got a product and a solution now. We've got something much fancier coming down the line. Still trying to keep it simple, but we've got new stuff coming. But we just apply the why to that. So why are we doing this? Why are we launching this new feature? Why are we challenging ourselves to develop this closer connection? Why are we challenge ourselves to link in with these partners to make sure we can be better at what we do? Is to save lives. If you know that, brilliant. The rest comes. The conversations with people that want to engage with you come if they know your why. The clients that want to sign up for your service, sign up for it if they understand your why and they share your why. Now, there's not anyone out there that won't share the why of wanting to save people's lives. Let's think about the year we've just been through. The mental health pandemic is round the corner. Once we've got COVID under control, we are all going to need to focus more on the top 2 inches and people's mindset and making sure that we're listening and we're acting and we know exactly who needs that support. So yeah, that's the story of our why. It probably adds to my embarrassment of not being able to know and articulate straight off the bat until someone pulled me up on it. But credit where credit's due, it's really catapulted what we do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a story that pains me to tell it.
No, it does. And I think, looking back, where are we now? 32, 33 episodes. The volume of people I speak to, and I'm doing a talk tonight actually that talks to a group of young athletes about the lessons that I've picked up from the podcast journey. And one of the things when I spoke to the guy who set up the call this morning was people want to hear what somebody who's leading the Red Arrows has got in common with somebody who's diving off a 27-meter platform with a Red Bull swimming hat on to somebody else who's set up a business in America because they're passionate about sport and coaching people. Where's the similarity? And I was saying, like I said, that everyone's on their own journey, but actually I think there are consistencies that come through with these people that I speak to. They are very clear in why they do what they do. And if we pull it back to your why of saving lives, I can't see anyone out there who said, no, I don't want to save lives. That's not something that you're going to say. So I think to have that as something that's so powerful that every single person out there can get it. It's been a wonderful hour kind of exploring that and bringing not just the sentence, the why to life, but actually the whole story behind it, because like you say, it's very powerful. So thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I've no doubt you're going to get a lot of people get in touch. So we've got all the links, we've got all the social media tags, we've got everything embedded in the notes underneath the show, but I cannot articulate my belief in what you're doing because it's so powerful. And like you say, it really will change people's lives. So thank you so much for your time today.
Brilliant. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you again there, Richard. It's hard to condense that discussion down to a few takeaway points as there was so much in there. but having seen the work that GoVox does firsthand, I can certainly advocate its value. Since recording that interview, I've had the absolute pleasure of working with both Richard and his team and seeing what they do on a day-to-day basis, and I can openly say it is both truly inspiring and extremely impactful. They are already supporting lots of different sports teams, from EFL football clubs to performance swimming programs. They support student wellbeing in schools, and they work across the business sector extensively. As we said at the start, if you've listened to that today and thought, actually, this is something that would really help someone in my network, please can I ask that you share this with them. It really is a game changer, and working in sport for 17 years, I don't say that lightly. All the information you need to find out more can be found in the show notes. Next week, we are continuing on the theme of mental health, and we're joined by two guests who are really bringing some powerful stories to life. I'm delighted to be joined by a British Armed Forces veteran and a station commander from the Fire and Rescue Service, and we have a dynamic discussion about the journey of mental health and well-being, exploring some of the stigmas associated with the area. Stay tuned, and thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Rogue Monkey Podcast.